Hello, everybody. Welcome to a very special edition of the Hatch Podcast. I am Sammy Roth.
I'm Rosie Murphy.
And we are here with Josh Wigler, who writes for The Hollywood Reporter. We are going to be talking about this cool thing that we just did. You probably saw this if you follow us on Twitter. We did a tournament called Lost Madness, where we took these rankings of Lost episodes, of every episode that Josh did for Hollywood Reporter, and we put all these episodes, his top 64, in a bracket, and we had you all vote on which ones were your favorite in the style of the NCAA March Madness tournament, and came out with a winner. And if you didn't see that, go to our Twitter at the Hatch Podcast to check it out. And we're going to spend a little time here with Josh talking about how that tournament went and his ranking. So, Josh, thanks very much for doing this.
Oh, thank you both for having me. And as we were saying offline, recording this on the 10-year anniversary of the Lost series finale. So it feels like the island brought us together. We were supposed to be here.
Yes, we are recording this, in fact, on May 23rd, 2020, 10 years later, which is an exciting day for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. For sure. No, it's just been, I mean, I don't know how you guys have been feeling, but certainly with the bracket, and this, again, we were talking offline about this. It was so fun to watch the bracket travel across Lost Twitter. And Lost Twitter is just a great place because I feel like you're really only tweeting about Lost anymore if you still really feel powerfully about it. Mm-hmm. And typically, if you feel powerfully about it right now, I think it's because you still love it.
Yeah.
So it's fun to see it bounce around, and it felt like every day I was seeing like some sort of contentious battle between like my babies, because I know these are 64 episodes of Lost, and in my podcasting neck of the woods, we describe ranking as an arbitrary and reductive exercise, and it's kind of true. Like, they're ranked into 64 different spots, but I could turn on any single one of these episodes on, even beyond the ones that made the cut, and I'd be pretty happy for at least 42 minutes. So this is tough. There was a lot of nail biters along the way in the tournament that you both cultivated here.
Before we talk about the results, Josh, just tell us a little bit. Like you ranked every episode of Lost, and you did it twice. Is that correct?
I have done this twice, and I've done this twice on my own, and I've done it an additional time over at Post Show Recaps. We did a podcast series called Lost Lives to mark the 10-year anniversary of the series premiere. And currently, Mike Bloom and I, who is my co-host over at Down the Hatch, clearly the lesser of the two, the Hatch Lost podcast, since we have the down at the front of it. He and I, we do a system that's called 4.2 stars, where every week we rate each episode on a scale of 0 to 4.2.
Sorry, 4.2 because 42 is one of the numbers, presumably.
Of course.
Okay.
Absolutely. And a lot of episodes get like a perfect 4.2 score from us because we love the show. But I do feel like something I say on the podcast over that Mike and I do often is Lost meets you where you are. And so where it meets me 5 years since I did that MTV ranking is very different, and is even more different from where it hit me 10 years ago today when the end ended. The show is much like the smoke monster, constantly evolving, I feel like. There are certain things that are constants, to use the parlance of the show for me, and then there are other things that are major variables, such as this last time I was very emboldened to like triple down on my love for expose, whereas on my first ranking I was like, I'm gonna just like loosely push expose forward and float the argument that this is actually a really great episode. And this time I boosted even further so that I was like just outside of the top 10.
I was just going to say, I think the thing that made expose fun this time around is that we were kind of in on the joke. So the first time either Nikki or Paolo is mentioned, it's kind of like, oh boy, here, we know what's coming. This is going to be a blast. Yeah. It's not getting in the way.
Even though we haven't gotten too much like hate mail about expose opinions, I'm looking at the bracket, and you mentioned Tricia Tanaka and expose and your love for those episodes. For the most part, the voting tracked really well with your rankings. Like all four number one seeds made the final four. But however, if you look at the first round, there were only two real upsets in terms of big lower seeds beating higher seeds. Excuse me, only really one, I should say, and that was Namaste, a 14th seed in your rankings based on our tournament, beating number 3 seeded Expose by a pretty wide margin, about 65-35. Tricia Tanaka, which you had, as a top 8 episode, so a 2 seed for us, did make it out of the first round just barely against 15th seed, not in Portland, 54-46.
Not surprised.
And then it did lose by a large margin to 10th seed at the beginning of the end in round 2.
Yeah.
Not surprised. Not surprised at all. Not surprised. I mean, Tricia Tanaka, I very defiantly hold as a top 10 episode of Lost, and I wield it as such, very much as like, this one's for me. This one is mine. This one is like, this is my episode. This is my victory. This is me looking death in the eye and saying, not today. Like Tricia Tanaka and the spirit of that episode just really speaks to everything that I love about Lost when it's at its most fun. Mm-hmm. Even and it's emotional in its own right. And I think like the introduction of Cheech as Hurley's dad, who is in the conversation at least for the best dads in Lost history. I don't think he's quite number one of those rankings, but he's up there.
There's a lot of bad dads.
There's so many bad dads. It's not like very competitive.
Yeah.
But I recognize it as an episode where there's a lot of variance on Tricia Tanaka. Very few people I would guess are quite as high on Tricia Tanaka as I am. I did meet if you go out to Oahu and do one of the Lost tours that they do out there. There's a company called Cost Tours that they have drivers who take you around the island and show you different shooting locations from the show. And my wife and I went many years ago, and right around the time I did those MTV rankings, so about 10 years on from the premiere. And the guy who was driving us around like showed us Hurley's golf course and everything, and like could not stop gushing about Tricia Tanaka is dead. And I felt like I found like my best friend on the planet that day. So like we may be the only two that have Tricia Tanaka quite so high, but I believe that it was. I don't remember the exact published date. I don't have the article in front of me. But I know that IGN did a ranking of every episode of Lost as well once upon a time. And I believe that they had Tricia Tanaka as the second worst episode of Lost.
Oh, my goodness.
So that's the variance we're talking about. And the argument there was like, if you needed a better example of Lost literally spinning its wheels in the third season, look no further than the episode of Tricia Tanaka where they're spinning their wheels trying to figure out what to do.
I just pulled it up. They have it second to last, right in front of Stranger in a Strange Land.
I'm glad that Stranger in a Strange Land is behind it at least, because that was the worst. But
at the very least, I think that's fair.
Yeah,
I get it. I think that it's one of those episodes where, and your mileage is going to vary, but like for me, when you go back and you watch Lost now and you revisit the show now, and you're doing that without the pressure of the week to week of what are the Whisperers, what is the monster, what is the island really, all of that stuff that are like kind of like you would go on like Dark UFO or you'd go on the message boards or whatever, and like that was sort of like the engine driving your interest. When you go back and you watch it now and you either know that those answers come in whatever form they come, whether you like them or not, or the answers come in forms that don't exist at all because they aren't addressed. Like the thing that you really do distill into, or at least I do, is I love to drill down into like the character beats, the music beats, the iconography of the show. And I think Tricia Tanaka is an episode that, in that experiencing of Lost, where you're not so concerned about the mystery every week, it's a beautiful character episode. In the live watching of the show, that's tough. But in the binging or the catching up, I think it's a pretty magical. This is the Tricia Tanaka podcast we're doing right now. Right?
That's correct. We're definitely going to include all of this discussion and not cut any of it.
Cool.
I was messing with you. So did you guys both get the bracket I sent you showing what the results?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to put one out here to start. The thing I think that was by far the most surprising to me in the results of this tournament was how well Man of Science, Man of Faith did, and particularly, I mean, it made it to the Elite Eight where it lost to Walkabout, but particularly the fact that Man of Science, Man of Faith, the season 2 premiere, first beat The Incident, the season 5 finale, 52-48, and then also slayed There's No Place Like Home, the season 4 finale, 58-42. I'm stunned by that. Those are two spectacular finales. I mean, it's a good premiere, but what do you guys think? Is that all just based on the strength of the opening sequence with Desmond, or is there? I just couldn't believe that it beat those two finales.
Yeah. I will say I voted for it in at least one of those matchups, and I can't recall which. But I love Man of Science, Man of Faith. It's a phenomenal premiere. You do get the great opening sequence with the introduction of Desmond, who goes on to be, a beloved character. And you get instantly all this great, like, Jack-John tension. There's so much promise in that episode, right? Like, it's a premiere, so there's no payoff. But I remember the first time I saw it just feeling so thrilled and so excited.
I think if in memory, like maybe it's weighted down a little bit because Adrift and Orientation follow. And Orientation, I think, is rightfully remembered as a really good episode. But Adrift is also rightfully remembered as a lower tier episode of the show. And I think that stretching out that whole arc across 3 episodes and across 3 separate weeks, that's another one of those examples of, like, in the live airing, I think maybe a little tough. And I actually even think in, like, the rewatching, it can be tough to sort of just be, like, getting different angles on the same exact scene over and over again. And while Orientation has the introduction of the Swan video of the Orientation film, which is so great and so weird.
Yeah, I would rank that episode even higher, despite the first scene of I mean, as much as I love the first scene, which is a classic in the show, like I feel like that episode doesn't get its full power without the stuff in Orientation, which really brings it home.
And I totally get that. I think that that's another, like, real taste dependent thing.
Yeah.
I think, like, for me, they're so closely related that it is hard to grade one higher than the other. I do think I would pick Man of Science, Man of Faith ultimately because just the Desmond introduction, it was, like, unlike anything I had ever seen, and it was such a strange answer to what's in the hatch. But I'm astonished that it fell, that it toppled both The Incident and There's No Place Like Home. 2 of the 6 finales, and the finales are always such blockbuster events. For them to both be knocked by Man of Science, Man of Faith is a real surprise, especially There's No Place Like Home, which I think you could make the argument that other than Through the Looking Glass, and I guess I have Exodus as a personal favorite. I think you could make the argument that There's No Place Like Home is just there's no action movie on Lost like There's No Place.
Was it you that said that on Twitter that it's Lost the action movie? Because I remember saying, okay, someone made that.
Yeah. And so is sort of The Shape of Things to Come is kind of like an action movie too. That's like sort of like the tight, like, short film, the prelude to it. But There's No Place Like Home, because of the writers' strike in season 4, they had to deal with a lot. They had so much that they had to figure out. Like, they had set up that, like, there's this fake out about Jin. They've set up who the Oceanic Six are. They've spread everybody out. They've kind of gotten you invested in Michael again. And everybody there's such a diaspora on the island at that point that they were banking on 16-ish episodes, I think, to finish that up. And they clock in at, I think, 14 episodes total.
14 hours,
that 3-parter. Yeah. It's a hard thing to do with only those 3 hours on the board, and the fact that they executed at such a high level has always really impressed me.
I mean, they had to get all of the chess pieces into exactly the right place because they had boxed themselves in with the flash forwards. I mean, everything had to work out absolutely perfectly. And that's even besides getting into what may be my favorite thread that episode, which is the, Ben versus Kimi versus the others, Orchid turning the wheel drama, which is just, like, remarkable.
Totally.
And with The Incident, I mean, I can see why maybe you could argue that There's No Place Like Home is the better episode. The Incident is, I think, my personal favorite episode of the show, which is why I was especially offended to see it get knocked off in the second round by a 6th seed. Like, I was so into the Dharma storyline, but just personally, I feel like the combination of the Ben stabbing Jacob scene followed immediately by the Incident sequence.
Yeah.
I just think are 2 of the most, like, beautifully executed sequences in the whole show, and also such, like, ridiculous payoffs for stuff that you've been waiting 5 years for. Like the one, who is Jacob, and then you finally meet him and he gets stabbed to death. And 2, what is the incident, which is in something that's been previewed since the very beginning of the 2nd season, and to have that end in such dramatic fashion, to me that's the high point of the show before a slightly lower point of season 6.
I don't know if I've said this on the show before. The first time I watched Lost, I borrowed the DVDs from a coworker at the Dairy Queen in the summer of 2010. So it was right after the series had finished, and I stopped after the season 5 finale because there was so much in the ether about how disappointing season 6 had been, that I just said, like, you know what, I'm so happy with the incident that I'm just going to let that be where the story ends for me. And of course I have since gone back and seen the whole thing, but it was incredibly satisfying. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons why that episode works so well is it's paying off the Jacob thing, as you say, Sammy, and like finally getting to see that character and to lose him in the space of a single episode. But I think, talking about like tightly plotted stuff, I think with season 4, they have such a hard job of resolving all the points that they do with a shortened episode order by necessity of the writer's strike. Season 5 is a really impressive feat for me because when Lost announced that it was ending and that it would only have the 3 more seasons left, and every season would be like about 16 episodes and they would be running uninterrupted, that plan didn't like exactly go off without a hitch, obviously, starting with season 4. Season 5 is like the only one that fully adheres to what they had said they were going to do. And that is the time travel season. And time travel is so narratively difficult to pull off. And I think that they kill it. I think season 5 is a deeply underrated season of the show. And oftentimes when I do a rewatch of the show, season 5 like always just like punches me in the mouth. I'm like, oh
Same.
my God. Just the way that like you're connecting all of this stuff together. Like I know a lot of people feel this way about season 4. I think I'm lower on season 4 than most people are. 5 is like sort of like my secret darling. Like 5 is like, it just like so much pays off, and the incident really pays it all off in sort of this big epic way. And Jack has been this character where he's going from being like this very depressed, I've messed up alcoholic type, the leader who got all of his people killed and is feeling the severe PTSD and guilt of all of that, to find like being like, okay, I've been flying around on a plane for the better part of a year trying to crash and get back to the island. I'm back. And I know I got to do something, but I have no idea what it is, and I know it will manifest for me. And so it's like Jack becomes sort of this very strange backseat passenger of a character until like this final thrust of the season, and it's such a different look. Just like not just the fact that he's in a jumpsuit, which is weird, but just like this energy that he's wearing is totally different. And
It's
the
like
incident
this-
kind of like ties you back to that.
It's
really
this
cool.
like interesting, like searching, wandering energy that I equate with John Locke most of the time. And it's when they're in the middle of that kind of role, one of their many role reversals, but that's kind of the big and final one, I think. And it works super well.
Yeah, agreed.
To me, the role reversal that's the most interesting in season 5 is not even Jack Locke. It's the Jack Sawyer role reversal. I mean, the scene where Sawyer's quoting Winston Churchill and, telling Jack, just, let me think this through and do my job and get out of my way. Like, season 5 is also the season where Sawyer is at his best and most interesting to watch, which is why, frankly, the incident itself is so heartbreaking because they... I don't know, the way they get you to invest so fast in the Sawyer-Juliet pairing, like, it's something that's so out of left field, but also works so perfectly, and that's why the ending is so tragic. I mean, I'm with you. Season 5 is not even the secret darling for me. Like, it is, I think, my favorite season of the show.
That's awesome. Because I know it was the year that, like, lost a lot of people. I know a lot of people are kind of let down by the final season, and I think... we're maybe seeing now with like the proliferation of Lost podcasts and Lost Twitter being like a big deal, just the reevaluations of the series, that maybe that final season isn't as much of a hard pass as some people tried to throw on it. And I think maybe like another benefactor of like just time and space of like when you go back and you watch it now, just it plays differently. But I think like on the weekly, season 6 was getting hit pretty hard. But I think like even season 5 was one of those seasons where it's like if you have to resort to time travel, clearly you just
you're out of ideas.
And I think like it's very clearly seeded throughout so much of early Lost. Like Mike and I just relatively recently got to one of the episodes in season 2 where Hurley and Saeed are sitting by the beach. It's after Shannon is gone, and Saeed is in mourning, and Hurley's trying to distract him and like make him feel feelings again. And they sit and they listen to the radio broadcast. And Hurley, like Saeed says, like, this could be coming from anywhere, and Hurley says, or any time. And that's season 2, you know.
Yeah.
So it was baked in. It was baked in for a while, the time travel stuff. So sucks to the haters is what I have to say.
So one more thing from the bracket here. This is to tie it into season 5. I was disappointed to see the Variable lose out. I mean, Deus Ex Machina and the Variable, both fabulous episodes. Deus Ex Machina beat the Variable 60-40, which was a disappointment to me. But I felt like overall, season 1 had an extremely strong performance in this bracket. If you look at the Hydra region, especially, all 4 of the finalists in the Hydra region were, you had season 1. You had Exodus, Deus Ex Machina, Do No Harm, and the pilot. And people people seem to love the early episodes, and Exodus versus the pilot in the finals of the Hydra region was the closest contest we ended up having. It was decided by 1 vote. Exodus sneaked ahead of the pilot. So just some interesting stuff there.
That's crazy. I'm surprised. I'm surprised Exodus beat Walkabout is a surprise to me. And this is even as somebody who is like, Exodus has been a personal favorite of mine for a long time. And once upon a time, I did describe it as the best of all time, and it really is because of the raft scene. But Walkabout really is the one that I would hang up on a piece of paper and be like, watch Lost. Here's the episode. Yeah, it's early. It's going to give you like the spirit of the thing. People stranded on an island. It's a low time commitment, and it's got a crazy reveal at the end of it. I was surprised to see it lose to, and I was surprised to see the pilot lose, honestly, to Exodus. I would think that there was just so much like respect for the granddaddy, the one that started it all. Yeah,
Exodus beat Walkabout by quite a bit more than it beat the pilot, which was quite surprising.
I was a little surprised to see Do No Harm do so well. That's an episode that I remember as like, it's late in season 1, and it's kind of at the end of this like kind of exhausting Boone death storyline. And Aaron is born, which is really beautiful, but I remember that episode feeling like where it falls in the calendar, I was kind of like, okay, I'm ready to move past this now. But people remember it, I guess, really, really positively.
Yeah, it's ER on the island.
Yeah,
like it really does feel like. And in revisiting it recently, I actually felt more strongly about it. I rated it pretty high in my THR rankings on the strength of the sequence where Aaron is born and Boone dies, and then the final montage of the episode is the biggest instance of the life and death theme that we get up to that point. And that music cue just kills me every time. But then going back and rewatching it in the last year, it's just like there's no wasted time at all. It's an episode where, and I think maybe, Rosie, the reason it feels so exhausting is because it's an exhausting episode.
It's emotionally
draining.
By design, is what
it is draining. Yeah.
And like it's like the sound design is tough because there's a lot of like re-breaking bones to keep Boone alive.
Yeah, and there's the whole sequence where he's trying to find a bamboo so that he can give him a blood transfusion, and it does put you in that space, so it does that very effectively.
Yes.
But
I think it benefited from easy matchups. I mean, it was up against 316 in the first round, which as much as I love season 5, 316 is not necessarily the most memorable season 5 episode.
Agreed.
And then it got Namaste, which was probably the weakest episode of I mean, I love season 5 start to finish. Namaste probably one of the weaker points.
That's fair.
So. And then it comes up against Pilot and gets buzzsawed. So I don't know. I mean, I think it had an easy.
It had a good path. It had a good run. It had a run that if you look at who it's up against, I mean, I don't know. In another universe, Expose just crushed that whole thing and took it all the way to the top. But obviously, we live in a sideways world to that.
I think the toughest of these brackets was the flame quadrant that we had here, the flame region. If you look at this, I mean, this was the one. It was highlighted by number 1 seeded Through the Looking Glass. You had Man of Tallahassee go up against The Brig in the second round here. Two fabulous season 3 Lost episodes. you had The End versus The Shape of Things to Come, which are, to my mind, top 10 episodes of the show. And I was actually kind of surprised knowing that The End is so controversial to see how roundly it beat The Shape of Things to Come, which I think has an argument for best, best non-finale lost episode potentially, up against The Constant.
I think so too. Yeah.
I mean, my God, it's just, because you had first round here, question mark versus orientation, Dead is Dead versus Because You Left. Like, these were some real tough ones in this bracket.
Yeah, I think the only one that's going to get trounced is Across the Sea.
Yeah,
and that's reputational and still maybe not undeserved. So that one's obviously going to get trounced. What They Died For is not an especially memorable episode. So that one getting cut in that first round makes a lot of sense. And The Substitute I would add into that category as well. And then I think looking at every single other competitor in the Flame section is a personal heartbreaker for me.
Yeah, there are a lot of my personal favorites in this bracket.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, even 16th seed, The Other 48 Days, is an episode that's very, very well-loved.
I love that episode.
It's the first format breaker.
Yeah.
It's the first all-island episode.
One of them versus Lockdown was an exceptionally hard matchup for me.
Yeah, that's tough. I think I agree ultimately with the choice to go Lockdown over one of them, even though I have it ranked differently in the writing, but in the recent revisiting of the episodes, that whole storyline with Sawyer hunting the frog and crushing the frog, and one of them is such a miss for me, and Lockdown has no miss.
I had forgotten that. Yeah, same. All I'm remembering from one of them is this is where Ben Linus gets introduced.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, Lockdown, is still in the Henry Gale section of things, but it's one of them introduces Henry Gale, and then Lockdown unmasks Henry Gale. We don't know he's Ben Linus yet, but Lockdown is the one that's yeah, this dude's not who he says he is. And even at that point, Henry Gale has to be okay, yeah, so the jig is up. So they're both in the same way that I think Man of Science, Man of Faith, and Orientation are connected.
Yeah.
To see them actually going up against each other in that first round is appropriate, but still a heartbreaker because they're just so close.
And I will say it does. I'm looking at the results here, and Lockdown won by a very large margin, 72 to 28%.
Yeah.
Another episode in this region that I love is Enter 77. Which was up against The Shape of Things to Come, and I never had a chance, and I wouldn't. I'm sure I voted for Shape of Things to Come, but it's just such a good one. We go to visit Mikhail Bakunin, and
Mikhail, super underrated character. We had Andrew Divoff on the podcast last year, and
amazing!
He was a blast.
And he's lovely, and he's just one of the most fun and hateable characters that Lost introduces, and it's almost a shame that he dies as early as he does.
He dies 1,000 times too.
Yeah.
We joke about how Ben Linus gets his butt kicked all the time, and in terms of lifespan on the show because Ben's on it for so long, but pound for pound in terms of how long you're on the show, Mikhail's just constantly getting wrecked.
Yes.
He gets supposedly killed every other episode that he's in.
What happens to him? He gets fried by the sonic fence,
right, and then shot through the chest with a harpoon gun, and he survives both times.
Up.
Yeah,
yep.
Takes 3 times to kill him, and then in the afterlife he gets killed too. So 4 times, magic number.
That's true. Yeah. In the afterlife, not only does he get killed, but he has to suffer the indignity of being a henchman to Martin Keamy, which I'm sure he wouldn't, wouldn't appreciate.
Yeah, he's Martin Keamy's Russia whisperer. He's his I could deal. He can apparently speak Korean.
Yes, right. We just actually we have Kevin Durand on this year, so I was watching his scenes in prep for that interview, and he was like, "Doesn't Mikhail speak Korean? Get him in here. Get Mikhail."
That's amazing.
It is.
That's so great.
That happens with Charlotte's character as well. She can speak Korean.
Yeah, she had they have a few people that are well, we got to have people interacting with Jin at a certain point. We just need to introduce some people who can speak Korean.
Oh, jeez.
But Shape of Things to Come over Enter 77. That's a tough matchup too, because I'm with you, Rosie. That Enter 77 is a sentimental favorite of mine. Mm-hmm. From Enter 77 onward, and I actually. I don't want to get into a thing, but I don't hate Stranger in a Strange Land the way that everybody else does. I think it has a plot utility that is poorly executed, but I think it has a function in the story. So I think from Not in Portland on, that whole run of season 3 has like a couple of blips in the road, but it's really certainly from Enter 7-7 onward where it's just like we're cooking with gas.
Yeah.
And it's like from like, I guess appropriate that it's the Flame Station episode where that starts.
Yeah.
That's funny. And in fact, this was not intentional, but Enter 7-7 did slot in here to the Flame region of our tournament, which is appropriate.
Yeah, no, very, don't mistake coincidence for fate.
As I mentioned, I mean, the Shape of Things to Come, I think, has an argument of being just, maybe along with The Constant is like the two perfect episodes of Lost that weren't finales. Just so tight start to finish, opening with Ben in the desert and what the fuck is going on, and closing with the scene in Widmore's apartment. And I mean, obviously the Alex, Kimi, Ben sequence is, all time, but an all-time great sequence. I mean, there's no moment of Lost that's more heart-wrenching in my opinion than that one. So that it was, as we're big boosters of the finale here, but I was even a little disappointed to see Shape of Things to Come go down to the end. I think I voted for Shape of Things to Come there.
I think I did too.
Seen that go on.
I would. I think, and again, to go back to that conversation about season 4, the season of the writers' strike, they come back with the Shape of Things.
Oh God, they did. You're right.
They're like writing has suspended. Danielle Rousseau is dead, and Carl is dead, and Alex has been captured. And they leave us there, and we don't know exactly what's going to come next. And I doubt that the Shape of Things to Come would have been exactly what it was in like if Lost had its way and it had written everything in like the clean top to bottom, no writer strike universe. I bet they dilly-dally a little bit on their way towards the things they do accomplish in the Shape of Things to Come. But I bet it's not quite as severe. Like, The Shape of Things to Come is a severe episode of television.
Yeah.
And to me, in the same way that I feel like Expose is sort of like this really pronounced apology letter, I think that The Shape of Things to Come is like a declaration of intent. It's like, we know that we're shorthanded. We know that we're short on time. So here we go. Things are blowing up. People are dead. Everything is chaos. And we're executing it marvelously. Shape of Things to Come being an argument for that being like the best non-premiere, non-finale episode of Lost. I'm absolutely here for that.
Yeah,
I totally agree that is a very serious contender.
And this gets us into the constant debate, and of course the Constant wins the tournament, and was that inevitable? Because people kept telling us the whole time that it was inevitable that the Constant would win, which maybe it was. But if you had to make me choose between the Shape of Things to Come and the Constant, that would be a very hard question for me to answer because they're both perfect.
Yeah.
We should run this again sometime with no premieres and no finales.
We had a couple of listeners suggest that.
Next year.
I'd be curious to see that experiment. Yeah, I would be very curious to see how that worked out.
Yeah.
Look, we can just use
because then
your
you would
again.
get Walkabout, The Constant,
Shape of Things to Come,
Deus Ex
Man of
Machina.
Science, Man of Faith. Yeah,
maybe the Constant, due to its victory, is retired.
Has to sit this
from
one
the
out.
Because I do agree with the audience feedback that I think in a situation like this, in a format like this, it doesn't surprise me that the Constant takes it ultimately. And every time the Constant's a perfect episode of TV, but Lost also has 40 perfect episodes of TV, like easy, like episodes of television that are just like dynamite, absolutely incredible. And like it's maybe like the hipster Lost fan in me that wants to rank the Constant lower than I ever put it. Like I've never ranked it number 1, but I also don't want to get like canceled, so I have to keep it in the top 5 every time. But there's like a piece of me that's like, but you're barely on the island in this episode. And if you're not on the island, are you really an episode of Lost? And so like there is that piece of the Constant where like, yeah, it's like Faraday radioing back and forth. And so there's like a little slice of beach there. And there's the ending with him. And Desmond's my constant if anything goes wrong. And it's beautiful. Do not get me wrong. It's all really, 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 really great. But Lost is the island show. And like if you don't have a very significant amount of island, I feel like, can you really be the best Lost episode? So I think I'd probably, in this tournament, had it come to it, I probably would have voted Shape of Things to Come over the Constant.
Ooh.
Interesting.
Don't at me.
No. Look, we've already made all of our listeners at you by any time someone complained that something wasn't in the bracket. It's like, it's Josh's fault, not ours.
I really appreciated that. I thought that was so funny. I thought that was so great.
We did spend a lot of time talking about how to do the seating and then just decided you'd already done it.
It was there. It's there, Just get it done.
We had a lot of people tell us that speaking of the constant, I think the comment that I saw, and I forget which one of our listeners made this comment, but someone on Twitter said this. They said they think it's the best episode of television, but not the best episode of Lost, which I think kind of tracks with what you were just saying. I don't know that I agree with that. I don't know that I care that it wasn't on the island, but I think that's actually a not uncommon opinion among the non-majority, but many people who were bewildered that the Constant won the tournament.
We need to have a name for the Lost tipsters that I self-identify with, like the Losters, the Lobsters.
Yeah.
But I think that jives very much with. I think as far as an episode is concerned, and like how it's playing with the traditional structure of the show, and how it's doing that after the show has already just like kind of flipped the table over and decided we're on the other side of the looking glass now, and now we're incorporating flash forwards into the future. So the show, just like a few episodes earlier, had already completely blown itself up in terms of structure. It inverted itself, and then the Constant is just like this totally different ride. It's very impressive on that sort of like storytelling structural level. And as far as like a single hour of the show from that perspective, and also being as emotional as it is, and how can you not be a sucker for Desmond and Penny?
Right.
So like all of that jives, all of that tracks.
I agreed. A lot of people said, the one of the final four matchups we had was the Constant versus Through the Looking Glass, and I'll bring this in because somehow we haven't talked about Through the Looking Glass yet. But that was the one that got the most votes. I think that about 1,000 people voted in that matchup, and many, many people said that should have been the finale. The championship game, not the Constant versus Exodus, but the Constant versus Through the Looking Glass. And I think that's astute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, as much as Through the Looking Glass is maybe not my personal favorite finale, but I can see why it's it's considered the best finale, and I can see why that was a hard choice for people. I mean, the Constant did not run away with that. 58-42. No. It wasn't close, but it wasn't a blowout either.
Yeah, and Through the Looking Glass has at least two Hall of Fame moments.
Sure, not Penny's boat, and we have to go back.
Not Penny's boat, and we have to go back. So. A lot of I think so the way that I wrapped up these rankings, it was the Constant, Through the Looking Glass, and Walkabout were my top three, and I do think, I don't know, like it's certainly like it hangs a lot on the idea of this was the historic episode that changed the game. Through the Looking Glass isn't just the season 3 finale, but it's the final chapter of book 1 of Lost. Of like if Lost is sort of like this multi-book saga, like that's the end of like a certain age of innocence. It's the end of the age of the flashback. It's the end of like traditional Lost, and it is punctuated by the death of one of like sort of. Not that he was ever like really an innocent character in Charlie. He's certainly a very tormented character, and a darker guy than Hurley. Hurley's the innocent, but I think like losing Charlie felt like it's not just emotional. It's not just the Not Penny's boat. It's not just like musically beautiful. It's not just like a perfect thematic statement on. You can die on this show and be at peace if like you've served a purpose, if you fulfilled your destiny, if you've lived your life and sacrificed it for the betterment of your neighbors. Like all of that is really rich, but it also is just kind of scary because it's like if Charlie can go, they really could probably kill anybody. And
they
one
do.
season later that they revealed John Locke is in a coffin,
Yeah.
So.
Speaking of character deaths, the one other surprise to me, the one other upset in the first round that we didn't talk about, I was surprised that the candidate beat White Rabbit because, I mean, you had the candidate Josh as a 12 seed, White Rabbit as a 5 seed, and, not that White Rabbit is necessarily a better episode. I just kind of figured that people, would have hated the multiple deaths so much that they would have downvoted that, and they did not. They overwhelmingly chose it over White Rabbit.
I think I think that whole sequence from like the moment that the bomb is ticking down, and then when it accelerates, and then when Saeed steps up, like it's just like I think like the exhaustion of Do No Harm distilled into like one act. And so I think that's more memorable than almost anything in White Rabbit. Yeah. But I think as an episode, I would maintain that White Rabbit's a better episode. Yeah. I don't know that it has like one single sequence that comes even close to rivaling just like the frenetic energy of losing Jin and Sun and Saeed and Frank Lapidus in quotes because you don't really lose them. Like that stuff is just so rough. It's very emotional and raw. These are people who you've been with for so long, and they're just like ripped from you so quickly that like you don't even really have time to process it. Like when Hurley's asking, "What about Saeed?" and Jack goes, "There is no Saeed." It's like that's how you feel in that moment. It's like, oh my God, that's just I hadn't even had time to process that. So the candidate is just massive on that front. But White Rabbit, I think, is in many ways the thesis statement of Lost.
Oh, I like that a lot. I like because that. I mean, yeah, that's where you get John Locke making a speech to Jack for the first time, articulating his philosophy.
It's the first real meeting of man of science and man of faith. So I think if like
that's interesting.
if you were to curate Lost into like, because it's a number like 16 essential episodes. Like if you don't have time to go back and rewatch the entire show, and you asked me, "Hey, Josh, can you come up with a playlist for which episodes of Lost should I watch?"
Oh, that's interesting.
White Rabbit would almost absolutely make that cut.
Yeah.
And I don't know that the candidate would. I think it would, but I don't know. I think that like you might be able to get the point of like, yeah, so the incident happens. And then in the final season, like a lot of people die, and then you have to fight the smoke monster, and so you just get to the end. Like I think that like you could cut most of the final season, and there's a lot of that first season that I would have a hard time cutting. Yeah. And I don't think that I could cut White Rabbit. I think White Rabbit is vital to what Lost is all about.
For sure. And I mean, in addition to the, what if everything that happened here happened for a reason, you get the introduction of the, the father-son dynamic, which is so critical to the show, and specifically the Jack Christian dynamic, which, of course, is crucial to the, the very final moments. And I think that's, I mean, I'll throw out one totally heretical opinion that I have here, which I think I shared on Twitter, so maybe some have seen it already. The first time I'm going
to take a sip of coffee in case I need to do a sip.
Go for it.
Carry on, Sammy.
The first time I tried to watch Lost, which was in 2005 when I would have been 13 years old, it was just out, the first season had come out on DVD, and I think my dad bought it and said, "Oh, you guys should, me and my brother, you guys should watch this. It sounds pretty good." I watched the first couple episodes. I want to say at least through Walkabout, maybe through House of the Rising Sun, and I was not that enamored, and I stopped. And I only came back to it later. But the real heretical part is that even once I did, I was never that... whatever the feeling that people got when they watched Walkabout, I missed that. Like, just from, not getting into it the first time. So Walkabout, to me, personally, is not a special episode. Like, I just have no recollection of that feeling of wonderment at learning about, realizing what had happened to John Locke. Although, obviously, I, didn't know that when I watched it. However, when I do think back to those first few episodes, it's really White Rabbit that stands out in my mind. I just, seeing Jack running through the jungle looking for his father's coffin, opening that up, Locke stopping Jack from falling off the cliff and looking at him and asking, what if everything that happened here happened for a reason? That's the thing that stands out, that I really feel the most strongly from early season one, that when I look back, that's what gives me goosebumps thinking about it and talking about it so much more than, Locke seeing his toes wiggle.
And so, today, again, as we're recording this, it's the 10-year anniversary of the finale, and earlier today, Mike and I we did like a live stream of the finale, and so we watched it with an audience, which was so much fun. And there's that moment when they're at the top of the cave at the heart of the island, where I can't call him Locke even though the show does, where the man in black is talking about, isn't this like old times? It's like you and me and the hatch. And what Jack kind of shouts back at him is like, "You're not John Locke. You wear his face, but you're nothing like him." And turns out Locke was right about just about everything. I wish he was still alive so I could tell him. And that's so satisfying period, full stop, end of sentence, but so satisfying in the context of White Rabbit.
Yeah.
So satisfying in the context of it's like it is the closing of that loop, of that first conversation of this big philosophical debate that's happening all throughout the show with John and Jack. And that being the episode that resonates for you more, Sammy, I think is a really powerful thing. Because if that Jack and John conversation, if you ever lose that in your heart as you're watching the show, then you've lost the show, I think. This
has been super fun.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm really just tickled that you guys did any of this. It was so funny to me to see the bracket pop. I'm like, oh sweet, a lost bracket, and then to see you guys tweet. And if you're mad about any of the seedings, blame at Round Tower. I was like, oh shit. So it's been a really fun few weeks for me, and I have felt very invested in the bracket success.
Good. Well, it definitely gave us something to do in the quarantine.
It's great.
So Josh,
it's great.
Before we go, tell let's do some cross promotion here. Tell everyone about your podcast real briefly.
Sure. So we do Down the Hatch. It's the Lost Rewatch podcast over at Post Show Recaps. It's myself and Mike Bloom, and we do really, really, really overly long deep dives into every single episode of Lost from a spoiler-filled perspective. So it assumes that you have seen Lost all the way through, or you don't care about getting spoiled. The average episode is roughly 2 to 2.5 hours. So we go real long on each episode. We are getting close to the final push of season 2 right now. As of this recording, we have Dave coming up next. So it's really fun. We are scheduled through December 2021. God willing, we all make it that far. That is what we have the end scheduled for. So we'll be at this for a minute.
Excellent. What's your social media?
You can find me at Round Howard. It's like Ron Howard, but rounder. There's a story. It's not worth getting into.
All right. Thank you, Josh.
Man,
and
that's
we
really
are,
fun.
As you probably know by now, if you're listening to this episode, we are the Hatch, a Lost podcast. We are just about to start season 4, premiering June the 2nd.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, we just put out a
You're in the middle of some really good stuff.
We are.
We are
really
stoked.
great, fun era
We've
of
got
Lost.
some great guests planned for this year. We're going to have Rebecca Mader on, Charlotte, and Kevin Durand, who is Kimi. And if you listen to our teaser, you'll catch a bit of Michael Emerson in there, who's coming back on this year. So it'll be a good group. And on Twitter, the Hatch Podcast as well.
Yeah, stay tuned for future brackets.
You got please do the worst episode ever. I need to see it, and I just need to shout you out the wealth of information for Lost fans from this podcast. It's really tremendous, and we'll make sure to give a really big shout out on the podcast next week. But we try to shout you guys out a lot
thanks
because
so much.
a lot of the great behind the scenes details come from your interviews, which are just spectacular.
Thank you very kindly.
You're doing really, really amazing work here. Again, it's just such a fun time to be a Lost nerd.
Yeah.
Who knew that a decade on, it would still be this fun? So, in no small part, thanks to the information that you are both bringing to light. So, keep it up and keep dragging my reputation through the mud. If you have any other use for it, I'm happy to surrender it to you. To your uses.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Anyway, Josh, thanks very much.
All right.
Thank you both.
All right. Talk to you soon, Josh.